Our attendees, thank you so much, everybody, for your patience while we worked out a couple kinks here. I will go ahead and turn it over to our presenter, Katie Arnold, here to introduce herself in just a moment. But before I do that, I do want to remind everyone that this webinar is being recorded today and it will be uploaded to YouTube at a later date. So do keep an eye on your emails for that. We can certainly have time at the end to answer kind of general questions and things of that nature. But yeah, please don't enter identifying information in the chat like phone numbers, social security numbers, addresses, things like that. If you have questions that are, more specific to your circumstances, we will have a phone number for you to call our intake line. See, I'm somewhere here in the presentation. But for now, Katie, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and who you are and which organization you're from here.
Sounds good. Thank you. Um, and I'm Katie Arnold, and I'm co-executive director of Community Mediation Minnesota. And I'm here with my partner, AJ Awed. AJ, are you there?
Yes, I am. I'm still here. Yep.
Okay, okay. And AJ and I are sorry. AJ and I, as I said, are the co-executive director. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly.
Okay. I keep I'm gonna turn off my video because I can't it keeps like doing something weird. It keeps automatically muting me, so I'm gonna turn off my video as well. So uh yeah, so go ahead, AJ, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Katie. So, also one of the co-executive directors of Community Mediation Minnesota, and we're really excited to be here to give a presentation on some mediation skills and some conflict resolution in housing. So, do you wanna start off, Katie, with our presentation?
Sure, sure. So,
Cool.
do you mind clicking to the next slide?
Yep.
Great. Thank you. So, first of all, so Community Mediation Minnesota is the umbrella organization of the state's six community dispute resolution programs for the state of Minnesota that are 494 qualified qualified groups. And we are a statewide organization. We've hit and been in every county doing work. We do a variety of different kinds of work, and we'll get into that more a little bit later. We're going to talk a little bit about what conflict really is. So, the definition, conflict is a perceived clash of needs, values, or goals. So, conflict's inevitable, right? It's inevitable in any type of relationship. It's how you handle the conflict that's really important. So, sources of conflict, miscommunication or a misunderstanding, differing expectations and or ideas, competing needs for resources like time and money or attention, emotional triggers, and past experiences. Why does conflict escalate? What happens there? When people feel unheard, they many times repeat themselves louder, dig deeper into their positions, stop being curious about others, and as they dig deeper into their own positions, it makes it harder and harder to listen well and hear the other person. So this we do this a lot in conflict. We all do, right? We when we are feeling triggered and upset and emotional and we're in a conflict, our minds, we might hear what the other person is saying, but we're not listening necessarily to what they're saying to understand it, rather listening to think about how we are going to respond. And so that's part of the reason why a conflict will escalate. Okay, AJ, do you mind going to the next slide? So we wanted to talk a little bit about common types of conflict in living facilities. There are a lot of neighbor to neighbors disputes, so noise complaints, shared space, the shared space, there's conflicts regarding that, like laundry or dining or recreational spaces where people have to come to agreements or they could be a conflict dealing with how something might be shaped, like an outdoor space or something like that. So there can also be resident staff disagreements. So a perceived fairness in a perceived fairness regarding policy enforcement. Well, person A feels like person B gets a lot of leniency, okay, or something along those lines. Communication breakdowns over maintenance or issues regarding care. There might be some people that think you really need this care, and someone who might say, I really don't need that care. Or why is this person siding with this person? This isn't what I want. All of these things can cause conflict. So, policy and rules concerns are another's. So, disagreements about new rules or changes in services. So, we learn about a lot of these things when it comes to co-ops or senior living facilities where, hey, there are new rules in place that I don't agree with and I don't want to do that. Or wait, what? Now we have these differences in services that I don't agree with. I don't want to pay for that service, or I don't think that service is necessary, or it's not a priority to me. So these are all ways that can cause conflicts in group areas that you live in and ways to address them. We'll talk about. So why don't I hand it over to you, AJ?
Awesome. Thank you, Katie. So why listening matters in conflict? And really, I want everyone to be focusing on the difference between listening versus hearing. So understanding that difference is key to why listening matters in conflict. So just click here. So to define the words here for ourselves, hearing, when we say hearing, we're talking about perceiving sounds, right? So somebody could be talking and you're perceiving these sounds. And listening equals actively trying to understand the meaning and emotions behind these perceived sounds or words that you're hearing. So when you're just hearing just perceive sounds, for the sake of hearing, you're not really listening, right? Listening is the intentional, active attempt to understand the meanings and emotions behind what the person is saying, so you can respond adequately. Um, how does listening de-escalate tension? So when you give someone attention to be able to really feel heard and you're listening actively, it makes the other person feel valued and heard. It oftentimes reduces their defensiveness, right? And allows them those words to penetrate them and to really substantively hear what you're trying to communicate. And it ultimately opens up space for creative solutions when you're in conflict. And it's important in the sense that without really truly listening and actively listening to hear what the person is saying and understanding what they're saying and understanding the emotions behind what they're saying, you really can't, it oftentimes, people in conflict, you know they get tensed up, they shut down, right? And an important value in mediation and conflict resolution is opening that defensiveness, right? And the best way of doing that is doing listening or practicing listening skills, giving the person full attention, to be heard, which allows you to be able then to have a conversation and ultimately discuss things in a positive and transformative way. So barriers to effective listening. So there are internal barriers and external barriers. When we're thinking internal barriers, we're thinking about, someone being quick to rebuttal, right? So again, they're perceiving these sounds, right? And they're hearing them, right? They may be doing it in a respectable way. They may be giving the person eye contact. They may be nodding forward, right? But if they're really not actively trying to understand, to listen, and they have in their head while they're nodding this instinct to just, oh, I know exactly what I'm going to say to refute what they just said to me, right? That thinking to rebut that person when they're talking. And then emotional reactivity, right? So that's a real strong barrier to effective listening, right? So when you go into a conversation with a high sense of anger or fear and even pride, right? We oftentimes are creating internal barriers to actively hear what the person is saying, right? Either you're scared of that person, and you fear retribution, right? Whether it's in a work, you know, um, if there's power dynamics there, if you're angry, right? You have a clouded judgment, things become blurry, so you're not really listening to hear what, and understand what they're saying. And then assumptions and stereotypes, right? These are huge barriers in effectively listening, right? You might see someone dressed in a certain way or come from a certain background and have stereotypes or assumptions of this person, and you just put them in a box, right? It's very dangerous when we have that type of lens of automatically putting people in a box, because that's not conducive to really hearing what the person and getting to a place of resolution. External barriers really are, your environment, right? Things that could limit your focus or disrupt your focus, be a distraction, noise, interruptions that could, ultimately skew what the person's saying to you because you missed a crucial point, as the operative word in their sentence when they're trying to communicate something. Other things are time pressures and just natural stresses. If you're trying to do a huddle meeting, and you're like, I got 5 minutes to resolve this dispute with you, or I have 5 minutes and I only have 5 minutes. You're limiting yourself to really actively listen and understand and get to a place of commonality and resolution between parties. So both internal pressures or barriers and external barriers are really huge hurdles in terms of active listening. Um, when barriers dominate, right, what happens is we shut down. So we stop listening, right? So whether it's that anger or whether it's those assumptions, um, whether it's you quickly coming to your rebuttals, or you have those environmental distractions or interruptions, or loud environment, we end up oftentimes just shutting down and stop listening, right? And remember, listening is that active participation of understanding what the person is saying, not just hearing them, right? And oftentimes these are the results. People get into flight or fight or freeze mode, right? If these barriers persist, right? If somebody is being yelled at, in a conversation, and being scolded, for example, it oftentimes have a negative effect on them, right? That person might respond with fighting you and yelling back, right? They might just shut down and just freeze or disengage, right? And ultimately creates resentment. It prolongs the conflict because it doesn't go to the heart of the issue. It doesn't go to that subject matter of, we want to get to an understanding so we can resolve what the issue is between us, or that person, or that boss, or that manager. So it really is important to recognize those barriers. Um, Moving on here, do you want to speak to this, Katie?
I Sure, either way, that's fine.
Yeah, please go
Um,
ahead.
okay, thanks. So we wanted to touch on some core mediation listening skills because, you know, so often, you know, people we find, and it's proven that when people actually feel heard, right? The reason we focus so much on listening is because when people actually feel heard, that actually makes the conflict a totally different situation, right? So people, when they feel heard, are much more willing to move forward, right? So when as a mediator or as a person in a conflict, just because you are saying I'm hearing you and I understand what you're saying, that doesn't mean you're agreeing with them, but it means that you are listening and they're feeling heard. And that's like it's like more than half of the conflict right there. So, in core mediation listening skills, we talk about these important pieces. So, active listening, paraphrasing, reflecting their feelings, you know, making eye contact, nodding your head, not looking at your phone, not being distracted and looking at the people around you, not checking your watch or your phone or anything like that, but letting them know that you are actually participating and listening to them. Asking open-ended questions, not yes, no things, but saying, tell me more about when you're saying this, or tell me more what you mean about this. Asking open-ended questions allows that person to freely speak to you more about what is actually going on. And we talk a lot about positions versus interests when we're talking about mediation and legal items, but I think that you can really understand a lot more if you're asking open-ended questions by the responses that they provide. Avoid assumptions. This is really important because and it's not always easy to do, right? But if you avoid assumptions, that's really going to help you in not asking leading questions as well and being able to listen and hear better about what's going on. And then staying neutral. If someone feels like you're siding with the person that they're having conflict with or the person that is supposed to be the guide through this process and feels that they're not really neutral, that they kind of agree with the other person or they see what they're saying more, they're going to feel defensive and they're going to feel closed off and they're not really going to want to share. Or they might go the other way where they become angry and try to convince you of their how they feel. So, staying neutral, avoiding assumptions, ask open-ended questions, and be sure to do active listening. Go ahead, AJ, if you want to switch the. So, thank you. So, mediation skills for everyday use in senior living. So, 5 key skills. Skill number 1, use neutral language. Don't use judgmental language. Don't make assumptions and use language that shows that you're already making assumptions about what people think or feel or hear, various things like that. Skill number 2, reflect back what you heard. So, a lot of times when people are in a conflict and they're feeling upset, they will say a lot of different things, right? And the way that you hear them may or may not be what they are hoping for you to hear. So when someone is sharing something with you, you can say, I hear what you're saying. And I want to confirm or I want to be sure I'm hearing you say, right? You can reflect back to them and they might say, "No, that's not what I'm saying." But then maybe they can say it in a different way that you will hear. Or if you are mediating these disputes, right? Then you can say, "I heard you say this. Person B, is that what you heard them say? Person A, this is what we're hearing. Is that what's going on?" Because part of the job of you is to listen for what you are hearing them say and not say and reflect it back so the person who they're in conflict with can hear it better. Skill number 3, identify common interests and not just positions. So, a lot of times, if people feel like they're on the same team or overall, they have the same overreaching, like overall goals. And so, like in a senior living facility, starting off something like, listen, I know that we all want a space where we can feel comfortable and do X, Y, or Z. I know that we all want that. And it just seems to me like we have different ways of looking at it, right? That already puts you all on the same page, right? You all have the same common goal. It's just a different way of attaining that goal, right? Okay, skill number 4, agree on the next steps together. All right, so AJ and I both think X, Y, and Z is a good idea. I'm going to look into X, AJ is going to look into Y, and then we'll come back together and we'll kind of talk through what we learn and how we maybe want to move forward, right? So agree on the next steps. And skill number 5, know when to involve a third neutral party, like a mediator or a staff liaison. You know, you don't have to just carry a conflict like this. A lot of times it's easier to involve someone and say, can you come be a neutral party and help us talk this through, right? Okay, go ahead, AJ. So go ahead. I'll let you take the next round here.
Okay, cool. No, thank you. So we just have some examples here just to highlight, active listening skills and focusing on interest over positions. This example is with regards to a noise complaint. Two neighbors were locked in a bitter conflict about noise levels. One constantly complained about music and late night activity, while the other felt unfairly policed and targeted. So they ended up having a conversation through a mediator. Um, or if, even so, if you want to hypothesize, you could have this conversation together, right, between the two parties. But through listening, right, it came out and using active listening skills that the complaining neighbor worked overnight shifts. So, and they were trying to get sleep during the day. The noise problem wasn't about the parties, it was simply about mismanaged schedules, essentially, right? Where one's working overnight and the other one is perceiving that as something else. Once the other neighbor understood this, right, that the party that's complaining that is, sleeping during the day and that works overnights, and understood this, they agreed to keep music low during the daytime hours. And in return, the night shift worker was more flexible about occasional evening gatherings, right? Understanding each other's realities turned hostilities ultimately into cooperation, right? So this is a really good example of when you actively listen and you have a focus on trying to understand what the issues are, checking those internal barriers and those external barriers, not coming into a conversation or a conflict with assumptions, right? Assuming someone's doing this, right? In this case, the party assumed that they were just, you know, being out late nights and, constantly just partying or something of that sort. Um, but once they got to the heart of the issues and realized what the difference was, this person is, an overnight worker, they really sleep during the day, then they had an opportunity to resolve the issue, right? They had that space to resolve their issue and move forward, right? And they didn't focus on, their positions, right? I need you to shut down the music. You can't do that. That's my position, right? Well, I'm not going to do that. That's my position, right? But they looked above that, right? What were these interests? And the interests here were one person was just trying to have a productive sleep so they can work properly and be effective at work. And I think, once the other person recognized this interest, obviously they had no complaints, right? And then they moved forward to finding a resolution. So this is a really good example of how mediation, if a mediator is involved, or just mediation skills truly can be transformative in disputes and conflict between parties. Um, so this is a practical listening exercise. There's not many of us in here. So Katie, how do you wanna proceed with this? Or Jennifer.
I'm not
Uh,
sure. Maybe we should just do it together as a group, you know?
mhm.
Like, because there's only There's only us and Jennifer and Linda Wilson. So I wonder if, if someone wants to share like an example of a concern and or something they've experienced and how, you know, someone could what skills they could use to listen with some of those things we've talked about. I don't know if anyone would have something you'd like to
Yeah,
volunteer.
it can be fictional as well. It doesn't have to be a legitimate
Right.
concern
Yeah,
or just
I think I think when I have one putting in into the context of the work that I do, I practice elder law and I have a lot of cases where there are conflicts between either assisted living facility and the resident, or even conflicts between residents. And so, one example that I've seen is there a conflict arises when a resident is using the common area to kind of store their own personal things, and
Oh, good one.
it
Yeah.
starts to upset sometimes other residents, but sometimes the facility itself, because the common areas for everyone. You have to keep your things in your rented unit, and I've
Yeah.
seen those kinds of things escalate. So maybe using that as an example.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
Um,
Yeah.
in the scenario, somebody was the facility had said, hey, you are, having these items out here. You need to place them back in your room. In the scenario, the thankfully the facility was willing to practice, some intentful listening and hear out the resident.
Hmm.
And ended up being discovered that some of the items that were out in that common room were left behind from the previous resident who had rented that before the current one. And
Oh,
so while some of those things were theirs, others were things that were left behind that she just didn't, he or she just didn't kind of remove or pick up after the previous one.
sure. Sure.
And in having a thoughtful discussion, they actually ended up, uh, you know, coming to an agreement where she was able to keep some of her things in the common room, and removing some others.
Okay. Wow, that's a really good example because I mean it's excellent because it also shows how, you know, the different positions and interests again, right? And why it was important to share that. Yeah, that is really good. That's a really good example.
Yeah, and I think if maybe I left out even more context. One of the items in particular was a cat tree, because this resident had a cat.
Okay.
And they said, you have to keep your cat, in your unit. You have to keep these items in the unit. And the interest behind the position was the reason she had that cat tree out there, one of the items she had out there, it was because the unit that she was in, that she had been moved to more recently, it was a much smaller unit than her last one. And her
Mhm.
Mm,
pet was just like much more confined than it was in the last one. And so she's just trying to find opportunities to,
Oh,
have her cat, have a little bit more space. And so they came to an agreement. The cat tree ended up being one of the items that were brought back into her room, but in exchange, she was allowed to have the cat out for a brief period of time in the common area, and then she would bring it back in. So like
oh, that's
that,
nice.
yeah,
Yeah.
so that was one of the, I think, interest versus position items that they were able to kind of figure out.
Right. That's really good. And kind of an understanding and a compromise and listening to what's going on and all of those factors play in here. Yeah. Yeah. That is great. That's
yeah,
very
that's
great.
really cool. powerful example of listening too, you know? 'Cause
Yep.
they wouldn't have got through that without actively listening and trying to understand what the motivations are. So it's really good.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Is there anyone who wants to share another one? Okay. Okay.
So let
Should
me
we
move here. Yep. So we'll move here. So just, do you want to do the recap here?
go ahead? Go ahead.
So yeah, I mean the real takeaways from this discussion here and presentation is really that listening is truly the foundation of conflict resolution. So without there being active listening and sharpening your active listening skills, it doesn't really matter what context it is. It's really particular in living, senior living or assisted living spaces and facilities, because there's so many different stakeholders, and different groups of stakeholders, from family members, residents, neighbors, and obviously management. So really those listening skills are very important, and hopefully as a takeaway to really internalize as you move forward. And then understanding the power that mediation offers, right, to really help communities remain peaceful, and offer conflict resolution that isn't truly adversarial, um, and allows people the opportunities to be heard, so people can ultimately resolve disputes with their interests centered. So those are two things that we want you to take away from this presentation, is really focusing on listening skills. Again, that's actively listening and understanding the meanings behind what the person's communicating and the emotions surrounding it, and realize when it's needed to have a mediation, and having a third party neutral to help facilitate that conversation, to help people have a better understanding of what the other is saying or what the other is attempting or seeking. Um, just give a shout out here on how communication, or how community mediation is really a good tool for parties. We do a lot of these presentations at a lot of facilities, and not many of them are aware of the accessibility of community mediation programs. As Katie said in our intro, we are the umbrella organization for six certified community dispute resolution programs in the state, and they are accessible and low cost. So they oftentimes are free or low cost, to participants. Mediation in itself is a very confidential process, with the full force of law in that. It's a voluntary process, and it really is relationship focused. So when there's conflicts that have to do, for instance, in senior living spaces, it's really important to understand the powers that mediation has to really rehabilitate relationships, because the process in itself is focused on that, and then encourages ongoing communication and respect. So it helps participants and parties really find their voice, and get some modeling of good communication skills. And again, could be used in a variety of scenarios, right? Whether it's both resident to residents, or resident to staff, or even family related disputes that affect a person's living in a facility. So community mediation is a very powerful tool, and we would love for everyone to understand that. Again, this is our information, so if there's ever a need or an interest, you could definitely go to our website. We have a form you can fill out to recommend a mediation if you're interested. Um, or you can, yeah, and then you could also contact our centers. So these are our local centers, in the state, and you can also just contact them directly. So I think that is the the end of it. So I think we'll turn it over to Jennifer or anyone else for Q&A, or if there's any other clarifying questions that people may have. I'd love to listen and try to answer those. Katie,
Yeah.
did I miss any?
No, I think that's perfect.
Awesome.
That's fantastic, you two. Yeah, yeah, no, awesome. Thank you so much for the presentation today. So yeah, we can certainly open the floor now. I don't believe we had questions throughout the webinar. So yes, if anyone does have any questions, you can certainly type them in the chat now if there are any general questions. on this subject, that'd be great. If you don't have any questions, feel free to certainly dip out at this point, and thank you for coming. But yeah, we can see here if there are any questions typed in the chat.
I have one real quick, if that's all right.
Yeah, of course.
So if somebody is working with the ombudsman's office, let's say they are in some kind of long-term care facility, either assisted living or skilled nursing, and they have a conflict with the assisted living facility, sometimes they're able to access ombudsmen who are like advocates for them. If they're working with an ombudsman to help them kind of navigate this dispute, and they want to utilize mediation, um, do you guys have relationships with the ombudsmans that they know that this exists as an option and that you guys are out there, or should the residents bring this to their attention and you guys can, schedule something all together?
That's a good question. I think we don't have a lot of close relationships with ombuds folks. So I think it's always beneficial if they if they bring, you know, if they bring that to the ombuds person.
Okay.
Hmm.
Okay. Yeah. And they would just, those links that you showed us to submit a request for mediation, you would just go about it that way.
Yes. Hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank
Perfect.
Yeah.
you.
Hmm.
And I just have to, I would almost even say that it would be a good thing to, because I could see how the facilities probably see that person, especially if they're in the advocate role. Um, that neutral element is in there, and that really is a huge factor in the mediations is having someone else. So that I would definitely encourage that. And I
Very,
think you just gave us a really good idea. So we may want to actually establish those relationships too, Katie, moving forward.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, I think that's a really good idea. Hmm.
so